Thank you very much. It's absolutely true. And now we turn to Professor Clement Price, from Newark.
Thank you.
The great professor of peace in Newark.
Thank you. Let me repeat what the Congressman said earlier. This kind of assembly, particularly with an objective such as ours, is something that Newark craves. I've served on a lot of panels. Bob and I are academicians. We serve on panels. But I've never served on a panel quite like this. Why? When I compare myself to my distinguished co-panelist, I'm a localist, and many of these people are involved in international initiatives and noble international objectives. But as I listen to my colleagues, I'm reminded of how peace, as we have spoken about it during this conference, during this summit, really begins in our hearts, in our homes, and in our communities. Newark is perhaps best suited for such a conference because historically, conflict, contestation, disagreement, misunderstanding, racism have been threaded through the history of this country and this city. Congressman Payne reminds us that Newark is the third oldest city in the United States, third oldest major city, actually. And what that means is that the city for the longest time has sought to make itself peaceful, to reconcile its differences, to remember as if its past and its future depend on an acute, well-informed memory. A few observations. Take a look at this lovely auditorium. This came as a result of a reconciliation more than 20 years ago here in New Jersey that Newark, a predominantly black city, an overwhelmingly poor city, a nearly forgotten city, could not only build and attract people such as you to the city, but that the space would thrive. So what we've been up to in Newark for over a half century, Donald, is creating these civic spaces where the work of peaceful people can take place. The Performing Arts Center is obviously an example of that work, that objective. The Newark Museum, the Newark Public Library, all these civic spaces where the work of peaceful people can take place. A few years ago, I went to Rwanda, and I was struck by two things as a localist: the extent to which the Rwandan people commemorate the genocide, the genocidal war that took place in Rwanda in the 1990s. The second thing which struck me, reminding me of home, is that at the time, Rwanda did not have a library system. These things that we Americans take for granted, these public institutions, these spaces where the work of peaceful people can take place, Rwanda was without. I think it's very interesting that the leading congressman in terms of African issues, the genocidal warfare in Darfur, is from Newark, New Jersey. Donald Payne's roots matter to the kind of congressman he has become. In my office at Rutgers, I have a photograph. Donald and I were talking about it just before the panel began. Wonderful photograph taken in April of 1968 of Martin Luther King, who came to Newark about a year after our civil unrest, our rebellion. The photographer was standing in back of Dr. King, and you know it's King because we know of King. and you see Congressman Payne on the front row. He looks like he's 17 years old in 1968. He was a tad older. And everybody, including the congressman, are looking up to King. King would leave Newark on his way to Memphis. I think the message, the moral of that story is that the work of peaceful men and women and children really matter. They may not matter in the moment, but over time, they truly will. My last point, which takes me back to Newark, and I welcome you here. Any town, any hamlet, any nation, any society that mistreats its women and its children will never experience peace. While you're here, and if you can't stay, come back. Be sure to take in the civic spaces, the public spaces, the buildings, the parks that have enabled Newark and other American cities and cities throughout the globe to recover from bad memories and bad historical narratives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Price. And now we move on to Zainab Salbi, the CEO of Women for Women International since 1993. She has helped 270,000 women rebuild after wars in different countries. Zainab Salbi.
An Italian priest tells a story of a disturbed child. The child was beating every other kid in the school, breaking all the furniture. They didn't know what to do with him. So they brought him a very complicated puzzle, full of oceans and deserts and mountains and forests. They thought that it will take him months to finish putting this puzzle together. That's how long it took the adult. They put him in a room with the puzzle, and 15 minutes later, they came and checked on him to see how he's doing, only to be surprised that he put the puzzle together. How did he do that? They wonder. And they notice that he saw a very simple shape of an apple in the back of the puzzle. And rather than putting it up front, he put it backward. And it was very simple. It took him 15 minutes to put the puzzle together. It was the apple. Ladies and gentlemen, I argue that the apple is women. And usually, when I talk about women, I usually say, if I just say the same thing the other speaker said with an accent, it will sound differently, but everyone today have an accent. So I'm just gonna say what every other sister and brother here said. It is women. You take every single crisis that we have in the world and you will see women are the majority of it. 2/3 of the most impoverished people in the world are women. 2/3 of the most illiterate people in the world are women and girls. 80% of the refugees in the world are women. 90% of modern war casualties are civilians, 75% of which are women and children. You want to talk about food security? Women are 70% of the farmers in the world. They produce 60% of our food. Yet they earn less than 10% of the income, and they own less than 2% of the land. Every single crisis we have in the world, except perhaps in nuclear, but even that, I guarantee you, women are being impacted with it the most. Yet are disproportionately impacting women. Yet we are completely absent from the negotiating tables. Of all the peace agreements that has happened since the Cold War, only 3% of peace agreements are signed by women. In this country, women only control 3% of decision makers in the media. We are absent, and if we are included, it's in very symbolic figures. Who said that if you just do a check mark on one woman or one minority, it will just get the job done. I cannot see when it comes to war. You see, I grew up in, like Leymah, like Ishmael, and Dr. Shirin Ebadi. I grew up in Iraq. We need to have our own reconciliation one day. And I want to tell you, if Saddam hijacked Iraq, America destroyed it with no excuse and no invitation. And for every front, and I learned in living and later working in war, for every frontline discussion of war, there is a backline discussion of war. And if the frontline discussion is controlled by men, it is the army and the fighting and the troops and the bullets and the planes and all of these things, and it's a true story. There's a backline discussion of women who are keeping life going, who keep the schools open, and keep the food on the table. And unless we understand peace, not only from the frontline discussion, i.e. the ending of fighting, but from the backline discussion, i.e. the building of life, we are missing out on the very definition of peace. I can't believe it that the only people who are not fighting and not killing and not pillaging and not raping and not burning, and the only group of people who are actually keeping life going are not included at the decision-making table, and that is women. In the last few months, I have traveled to some of the countries that I work with at Women for Women International. And I asked women in different countries, what does peace mean for them? I was in Congo a couple of months ago, a genocide that is happening today, my friends. There are 40 women getting raped every single day in Congo, but that's not only the war. Out of 100 women in Eastern Congo, 47 of them do not have mattresses. 52 of them eat one meal a day. 80 of them come from villages that have been attacked. 77 of them think of hurting themselves. 42 of them never been to school. We need to understand peace of what they are telling us is not only the ending of fighting. I asked a Congolese woman what does peace means, and she said, food for my children. I asked a Sudanese woman, a Southern Sudanese woman, what does peace mean? She says, peace means I have toenails. I said, what is toenails? What is that? I'm thinking of my pedicure. And she said, for 18 years during the war, I walked, because twice I was kidnapped and enslaved and had to cook and carry water and ammunition for the rebels and raped. And so I walked through, and I did not sleep in one place more than 5 nights a day. And in the walking, my toenails fell. And peace means for me is staying in one place so my toenails grow back again. As a Congolese woman did say, peace is in my heart. She did say, I can't wait for the world to have peace or to give me peace. It's in my heart. I call her my own Dalai Lama. But she was able to do that because she was also reminded that there are other people who are there for her. A Bosnian journalist said, war is like a flashlight on humanity. It shows you the worst aspects of humanity, and it also shows you the best aspect of humanity. And it's up to each one of us. Each one of us are an agent of change that can put that flashlight on in whatever direction you want it to be. So at Women for Women International, I ask everyone to sponsor one woman survivor of war by exchanging pictures and letters with her and sending her $30 a month only for only 1 year to help her get a vocational and business skills training, get an educational program, and rebuild her life on her own, because at the end of the day, like Ishmael said, it's about her own integrity to stand up on her feet and get her own job and feed her own children. It's not about the hand-me-down. It is about your investment in enabling her to stand up on her feet back again, because she can. And last but not least, I'm a big fan of Rumi, a 13th century Sufi poet. And one of my favorite poems by him, he says, out beyond the worlds of right doings and wrongdoings, there is a field. I shall meet you there, When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other no longer makes any sense. Friends, out beyond the worlds of war and peace, there is a field, and we shall meet there. And the work here is to make that field a much, much bigger place. So join me in the field.
Thank you. Thank you, Zainab. Wonderful. 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 Thank you, Zainab. Thank you. Now, there's a very interesting sociological fact, which is that it's militarism that has been mentioned often thrives on secrecy. And sociologists note that de Tocqueville in America long ago, and other places, women tend to share information, and they don't go for secrecy. And actually, in various men's canons of things, this has been accused as being gossip. But actually, it's a very powerful medium of information, and one of the reasons these terrible things happen is people don't know what is going on. Then in the recent uprisings, there's been a lot of talk of social media and how this is a way of sharing information and how powerful it is. And therefore, we now turn to Joe Green, who is working with that, in that medium, and to helping all of this type of positive peace causes. Joe Green, your turn.
Thanks, Bob. It's humbling being here and sort of feeling very privileged to be a middle-class white kid who grew up in Santa Monica and sort of sitting beside all these people with all these, much tougher experiences than I can ever know. It was wonderful to hear Leymah talk about organizing, and that's the tradition that I come from. And this job title of organizer is something I don't think most people had heard of. You might have assumed you were helping people clean their closets. And until this guy, Barack Obama, ran for president and talked about his background as a community organizer, to which Sarah Palin made fun of him for not having any real responsibility. The great retort to which, I think, and I'm forgetting the name, was from a congressman from Tennessee who said, well, Pontius Pilate was a governor, Jesus was an organizer, so I'll pick the organizer any day. At a fundamental level, organizing is about working through communities and working through people's real relationships. And I had the fortune of being trained as an organizer. And when I first was exposed to social media, I was a volunteer on John Kerry's campaign in 2003, I first saw Friendster, which sort of actually ignominiously shut down last week, but which was the first sort of pioneer of social networking. And what struck me was that I was spending all my time sort of trying to unlock people's address books, who they knew, and trying to bring them together for meetings. And I saw this site where you could see everybody's address book out in the open. And I had the good fortune of being roommates with the folks that created Facebook and working on Facebook. And what we started to realize at that time was that this was going to unlock the democratic potential of the internet. And people have talked about how the internet would revolutionize sort of civic society since I think it was sort of barely a dream. And it hadn't really happened yet. And then there was this really big missing ingredient, which was identity. So the internet, for most of its history, has been a very anonymous place where people would sort of represent themselves with a handle or sort of a made-up identity. You might be Boba Fett 12 in the Star Wars Usenet group. And only really with the growing ubiquity of Facebook has real identity taken hold on the internet. There was a famous Far Side cartoon that said, there was a picture of a dog sitting at a computer and this guy standing over him, and the dog says, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And now Bob Thurman, they know that you're a dog. So what we've done at my company, Causes, is to build organizing tools on top of Facebook. And we're really privileged and honored to have about 150 million people who use our product. And it's fundamentally built around how can you help people to realize the connections that already exist. And we've seen that happen from people raising money for their local church to people supporting and organizing in Egypt and Tunisia and raising money for Women for Women International is actually one of our most successful fundraisers. And so I think that what's really powerful about this is that it enables traditions and techniques that have existed for thousands of years. This is not, and I think people can get very sort of scared by the internet or social media or think it's something completely different. But in fact, the people who most successfully use it are actually taking techniques that have been around for a really long time and simply allowing them to have a magnified effect. And Mark Zuckerberg, I think, really well said, and many other leaders in social media when the uprisings were happening in the Arab world, to very quickly not take credit for it. I think that's really important, that it's simply a channel for people realizing their own dreams and their own desires. And so that's, what we try to do is to create those tools. But I think there's a real opportunity for peace, because I think peace comes from understanding. And, one of my favorite experiences on Facebook has been being someone who's sort of relatively well-known within the Facebook community. I get a very large number of friend requests. I noticed a couple years ago, I started getting a lot of friend requests from people in Palestine. And people obviously I'd never met, and I started sort of responding to a few of them, and I was sort of curious about it. And I thought, why are these people getting in touch with me? And it turned out it had become a sort of status symbol to have friends from Harvard, which is where I went to school. And what was fascinating to me about that, and they wanted someone to talk to in English, because one of the great the great things to be able to get is English comprehension, because that sort of opens up the world in many ways. And for me as a Jewish kid in the United States, talking to people in Palestine about because they wanted to talk in English and talk to someone who'd been to an American university, completely irrespective of my background or their background, it sort of turned on for me how direct that connection can be, across the world. And so, it's only our hope that we can do a small part to help, all the work that the folks here are doing.
Thank you, Joe Green. Wonderful. And Joe will be back this afternoon. And now we turn to anchorman here is Jonathan Granoff, my good friend, and our Sufi non-proliferator.
Disarmament. Well, thank you. You can imagine the amount of work that Professor Thurman has had to go through herding all of us cats.
No, I didn't bring anything. Hope Gamble, and I just have to say this, thank you for giving me that opportunity. Hope Gamble and Kira Boré and Gandon Thurman and Nina Thurman, they are the ones who really, as usual, the women did all the work. And at least I can give them credit, at least. I'm just holding the fort here as a figurehead and a mouthpiece. But they did all the work, and they deserve everyone's gratitude and a round of applause. And Rachel Goldstein, Goldstein for production, and Rachel Fink. Okay, thank you, John. Otherwise, that might have gone past the time.
And Rachel and Julia and all the volunteers that they've been able to round up, because that's really something. Are they around? Well, I have a different kind of realism than we usually hear in the media. I don't think it's realistic to cook the planet with fossil fuel and think we can pass it on to our kids. It's not realistic. I don't think it's realistic to talk about family values and completely ignore that half the world's population is living on less than $2 a day unnecessarily. I don't think it's realistic to leave thousands, 22,000 nuclear weapons like eyes of death looking upon us every evening when we sleep. 22,000 nuclear weapons, most of them with triggering devices the size of the weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima. The amount of destructive capacity of these weapons simply boggles the imagination, and yet, well, I bought my gas the other day from a Russian concession. When my computer didn't work, I was on the phone with a young woman from Bangalore. My suit was made in Canada, and the money that I used for these goods and services was borrowed from China. So why does Russia have several thousand nuclear weapons pointed at us? Why does India, when you have several 100 million people living in abject poverty, squandering its resources on nuclear weapons? And why are we pointing nuclear weapons at Russia? And why are we not asking answers to those questions? I'll come back to this in a second. But for me, the idea that in perpetuity, these weapons won't be used by accident, design, or madness is completely unrealistic. So I met Bobby Kennedy when I was interning in Washington in the 1960s, and he told me what really happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it's really simple. Good luck saved the world. In 1995, a weather satellite took off from Norway, and the Russians were told that this was going to happen, but it looked like a Trident launch. Boris Yeltsin had 8 minutes to decide whether we would be here today. Bill Perry, the Secretary of Defense, spoke at the UN 2 years ago and told a story that put everyone's hairs on edge about how a satellite sensor had been recalibrated, and the first sunrise that it saw looked like a full-scale Soviet launch. And the world hung in the balance for 15 minutes. That's all the time that was. That's not realism. That's not real. So Bobby Kennedy said that the litmus test of our time is whether we get rid of nuclear weapons before they get rid of us. And I believe that. And I believe that the same principles that apply for peace in the most important place in our life, which is in our heart, will give us the key to dealing with getting rid of nuclear weapons. And that principle is very simple. It's the golden rule. If you want peace in your heart, treat other lives with love, kindness, and compassion. You will find that you will have peace. If you treat other lives with arrogance, hostility, anger, and manipulation, I guarantee you'll have chaos in your heart. It's that simple. Separate from yourself that which separates you from others, and you will have harmony with the one self within all selves, the one life in all lives. Now, why do we have chaos in the world? We have chaos because that principle of equity, of seeing other lives as one, of seeing justice, is being neglected. So the idea that you can have the necessary cooperation on protecting the global commons, the oceans, where 70% of the fishing stocks are at risk, and the very pH of it is at risk, the oceans, the climate, the rainforests are living systems that are local. They are local living systems. We can't live without the health of the climate and the rainforest. We are thinking locally and acting globally. The living systems upon which we depend require global cooperation to address. If one country can dump in the oceans, everyone can dump through their flag. So you have to have a global system. If one country has nuclear weapons, others will want them and get them. So you have to have a global system. If you're going to address poverty, you can't have multiple bilateral arrangements where the rich always out-manipulate the poor. You have to have a global system. So for the first time in human history, the spiritual admonition that if you want to get enlightened, if you want to find peace in your life, see the human family as one. See other lives as your own life. This has always been the ticket to spiritual awakening. This is not secret. But I'll digress. I do have a secret. There is an 11th commandment. She told me. Don't kill everybody. And these three issues, if not addressed correctly, will not allow us to pass on a legacy to our children. Everybody will be killed if we don't get them right. And we're the first generation in human history that must decide whether we will be the last. We have to decide whether there will be ancestors. This has never happened before. And this spiritual admonition to see the human family as one has now become a practical necessity. This is very unique. So what can we do? I think, one, we always have to ask ourselves, what is the life within my heart today? What is the world inside of me? Who is conscious inside of me? What is precious to me? Is it love of self or selfless love? What is precious to me? Do I truly feel interconnected and care about other lives? Am I connected? Am I awake? That's the most important place. And we have to ask those questions ourselves. That's secret and private, silent and precious. But we have to ask, I'll finish. Give me a minute. We have to ask all of our political leaders 3 questions, and the Nobel laureates all agreed in 2007 that these are something that every individual is responsible to ask. And it's on the website of newarkpeace.org. Every politician must be asked, what are your plans to deal with poverty? If you don't have a plan, the Millennium Development Goals are right there. But ask them, we want to know what's your plan. 2, what are your plans to protect the environment? You don't have a plan? There's the Kyoto Protocols, there's plenty of plans. But they need to answer that question. And 3, what are your plans to get rid of nuclear weapons? Not should we get rid of them, but what are your plans? And if every one of us demands answers to those questions and sends that virally, we can actually have an action that will make a difference. And let me conclude with a simple prayer. If you look at the people sitting next to you and you look at yourself, you will pray for their well-being and your own, and you will remember that we here are the people we have been waiting for. Thank you.
Jonathan. Thank you. Now, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. We're with you. We're with you. Now, if you will all have a little patience, I'd like to go over the time just a little bit because we haven't heard yet from someone we should hear from. Jody Williams, come on. Yes, yes, Jody Williams.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief because I could go on and on about everything, a comment of, responding to everybody. And I decided I'm going to take up Leymah's uncomfortable questions. Although later this afternoon, when I am forced to speak yet another time, I am going to talk about organizing not being rocket science, because it isn't. But right now, I do want to talk about the issue of weapons and militarism and men and women. And my husband is the executive director of the Arms Division, Weapons, at Human Rights Watch. Steve Goose. We met banning landmines. He is one of the ones who led the initiative that resulted in the 2008 treaty banning cluster bombs. At the same time, and he's a very progressive man, or I wouldn't have him as my own. However, when I talk about men as the warriors, men as the ones who get off on designing the weapons, men as the ones who, throughout history, are the ones who cause war, men are the ones who rape, he doesn't like to hear that. I can understand why, but the freaking reality is that men are the ones who have done all this.
Yes, that's true.
And just as we keep talking about here in the US, if we don't face the darker side of our history, we can never change and move forward to be a better nation that actually lives up to the things it says it lives up to. Unless we as human beings really recognize that men do make war, men are the huge part of the problem, and that I love them, but when it comes to militarism and war, and then they throw at you, when Golda Meir was in office, nothing changed. You had Hillary and Condoleezza, And I'm like, excuse me, one woman who has accepted the male-dominated framework of power is not a change agent. A change agent would be women who are elected to go into Congress or Parliament or wherever with a different agenda to change how it's done. And somebody talked about how women communicate and men, I'm not going to go where I was just going to go. I give you just a teeny example of the Nobel Women's Initiative. In the 110-year history of the Nobel Peace Prize, there have been 12 women. 7 of us are alive today. That shows you the grotesque sexism. I recently was talking to a colleague over in Norway who knows the Nobel people, and I was pissing and moaning about the fact that it's the men who wage war and the women who pick up the pieces, and why the hell aren't there more recognized women? And his response was, nobody nominates them. There aren't enough to be nominated. I said, I'm sending you a name every single day of the year. And Shirin and I were together in Hiroshima a couple years ago, and there's a gentleman from the UN addressing this group, mostly of women, and I asked a question about how come the UN has not been able to meet its own goal of a mere 10% of management being women. And he said, well, I have to admit, we aren't even at 3%. I said, you know, you kind of suck. Why? Why? And he said, because we have not found qualified women. Oh. He's sitting there. I said, excuse me, I nominate Shirin Ebadi. I would imagine she's fairly competent to do something in that UN. She could take over the Human Rights Commission and have them actually give a shit about human rights and not about... I'd have Leymah. I wouldn't just have her running the women's division of the UN, or the new name, whatever the hell it is. I would have her be the Secretary General. Until we recognize that everything Leymah had to say, everything Shirin has fought for, everything that the women sitting here fight for is reality, and as long as we oppress half the world, we oppress everybody. As long as we oppress more than half of the world, we are taking away possibilities for all of us. Respecting our rights is enhancing your rights, gentlemen. But until men are willing to face what they have done on this planet and willing to face that they continue to keep women out, it will not change. And every time I look at a picture of a peace, peace negotiations, or I look at a, president's panel, or this, it's always men in suits, always. No offense to the gentlemen who have sartorial splendor. My husband in the peace movement is known for his sartorial splendor. I appreciate him in his suit. Although when I first dated him, I thought, who the hell is this dude in the suit? But until, I'll end with, I've been working with this woman from Sweden who's trying to get the corporate world to recognize also you need more women in there to change the greed factor. Not that women are perfect. I'm not saying we're perfect. But she was talking about all the studies that indicate unless 30% of the board of a corporation is women, it doesn't change because men dominate. If you got one token woman in the board, it is not going to change. So I challenge the men of power To expand your minds and reach out to bring women where we should be. We should not, in the year 2011, having to be asking a bunch of men who've led this planet to war over and over and over again to recognize our freaking rights. Please, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
To the women who work for women. To the women who work for women, you know. To the liberated men. What? Oh, that's on. Run right over and hug you for that one. Thank you. See? You too? Awesome. I'm not hugging you. No. Just so you know, Jonathan and I have an intimacy problem, and I am not hugging him. He's just trying to trick me into hugging him. I ain't doing it. Oh, you! I didn't. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank everybody.
Thank everybody.
Thank everybody for being here, and that means some of the men here are probably good.
Thank you all, and apologies to the workshop people for making everyone a little bit late, and we'll see you back at 2 o'clock.